Treaty Principles Bill and make up your own mind based on reading the facts. You don't have to rely on your friendly mate who's done it all for you and told you the story so well. You can actually look for yourself at treaty.nz.
Yeah, g'day. So David's talking about my video that I made. And while David Seymour obviously wasn't my target audience, I'm assuming that he's seen it because I've had a huge number of Māori and Pākehā message me to say, oh my gosh, I finally get it now. It finally makes sense. And when I made that video, I was thinking, how would I explain how we got to this Treaty Principles Bill to my dad or my Māori uncles who don't really care too much about the treaty? And so I simplified it as best as I could to give some context to the background behind the Treaty Principles Bill. And David Seymour seems a little bit bothered by that. I just want to note that David at the end of his video says, go look at whatever his website is, go look at the bill, go look at the actual words that we've put together. He doesn't say, go get clued up on the history of the Treaty of Waitangi, or go read any of the Waitangi Tribunal reports or any articles from experts or academics. He says, go look at what I've done, don't look at anything else. Because he's trying to narrow it down to basically a yes or no question. Should all New Zealanders have equal rights? And that's the equivalent of me going, should rich people contribute fairly to the tax system? Yes or no, yes or no? But he's also quite clever with the way he words this stuff, because he's trying to make it seem like Pākehā New Zealanders miss out on something by not getting tino rangatiratanga. Tino rangatiratanga means nothing to my Canadian mum. Tino rangatiratanga is a Māori concept. My mum wouldn't even want it. And I find it really interesting that David used the Resource Management Act as his example of discrimination, because one of the main ideas on TikTok is that David wants tino rangatiratanga out of the way because it's one less step in the process for resource consents for things like seabed mining. David also said that he believes that tino rangatiratanga was guaranteed to all New Zealanders, but I'm sure the ACT Party campaigned on evidence-based legislation, and I actually haven't seen a single piece of evidence that confirms that. David was also pretty unhappy with the principle of partnership. But to be honest, when I made my earlier videos, I was being quite fair and generous to the Crown in describing the treaty principles. All of the top-tier treaty experts actually say that the English version of the treaty doesn't even count in accordance with international and contract law principles. And I would have thought David would be quite pro-contract law principles and making sure that contracts have integrity and that they're enforced properly, and I really would have thought he would be on board with that. And the reason that international and contract law principles say that the English version shouldn't apply is because only a really small number of chiefs signed it, and they were only offered the English version with notes about what the Māori said on the side, but check Tēnā Ngata for more information. So the principle of partnership is already a massive compromise. And then David started talking about how everybody's a human being, but nobody was ever denying that. You can only really agree with David's position that everyone's a human being and everyone needs a blanket approach if you don't believe there's anything wrong right now. Because he's saying that Māori are getting all these benefits and these privileges, but why are Māori the worst in every single negative statistic? Nearly 70% of children in state care are Māori, over 50% of prisoners are Māori. Suicide rates for Māori are nearly twice as high. The government literally just apologised this week to survivors of abuse in state care, and the report that came out of that Commission of Inquiry showed that Māori were horrifically abused in these institutions. And this is all fact, not what I believe. Did you know in the early 1800s, missionaries, who were people that came over to set the church up, came to New Zealand and studied Māori life, and they wrote back to London to say, Māori fathers are so tender, loving and caring. They carry baby all day, they look after baby, and I haven't seen any of them lay a hand on the child or mother. Contrast that to England at the time, where domestic violence was actually a social norm among the lower and middle classes, and a woman was literally the property of her husband, and she wasn't allowed to divorce him unless he had beaten her and cheated. So I guess my question to David Seymour is, what is your explanation for the horrific overrepresentation of Māori in all of these statistics? Because we know from the history records that domestic violence was not a social norm for Māori communities. Because I can't think of a logical answer that you could give me that doesn't accept the fact that colonisation and the stripping of tino rangatiratanga from these hapu has contributed significantly to the statistics that we're in today. And before anyone says not all Māori are like that, you don't have to convince me, because my dad is one of them. He just goes to work, puts his head down, mahi hard, comes home, watches the All Blacks. He's not reading treaty articles. And I just want to offer one really tangible example that really clicked for my dad. When soldiers came back from the war, Pākehā veterans were offered rehabilitation programs that Māori veterans were not offered. And then Pākehā veterans also received parcels of Māori land as like a thank you for going to war. So Māori veterans who had gone over to fight for King and Country came back to being landless and offered no recovery support, and Ed Sykes is our expert. Like, I genuinely don't understand how you could deny that something like that would have a massive impact on the generations to come. But yeah, I guess we just have fundamentally different starting points on what the big problems in society are. You think that barriers to developing properties is a big issue, and I think the number of kids in state care is, so ka pai koe.